Open your Bibles to Matthew 27. Matthew 27. Now, before we go there, if you can, put that list up on the screen. A quick review of the things and the topics that we have covered up to this point. There's been 9 topics. There you have it on the screen. Quickly reading through them. Number 1, a liar, lunatic, or the Christ, the Messiah. 2, claims to be equal with God. 3, allowed himself to be worshipped. 4, indirect claims to be in God. And by the way, these will all be chapters. Or most of them will be in the written format of these messages in the very near future. 5, liar, lunatic, the Christ, reasons why he was not the first 2. 6, the evidence of the Old Testament, the fingerprint of God. 7, did Jesus deliberately try to fulfill the Masonic prophecies? 8, Jesus gave advance notice about the resurrection. 9, could Jesus survive the crucifixion? And tonight, we ask the question, did someone remove the body? That's Jesus' body when he was in the tomb. Now leave it up there for a few moments. In Matthew 27, starting with verse 57, I'll read the verses and then we'll start from that point on. 57 reads, when the even was come, there came a rich man of Arimathea named Joseph, who also himself was Jesus' disciple. He went to Pilate and begged the body of Jesus. Then Pilate commanded the body to be delivered. And when Joseph had taken the body, he wrapped it in a clean linen cloth. And that's where we start. It's pretty much where we left off last time concerning Jesus' burial. I want to continue that, at least start there again this evening and move forward from that point. Now, we know that this tomb belonged to Joseph of Arimathea. Joseph of Arimathea, by all records that we can get our hands on and information, was a wealthy individual, which came to be a disciple of Jesus Christ also. And the tomb that he had for himself when he would pass on, he decided to bury Jesus in that particular tomb, which was not located far away where Jesus had been crucified. Now, the disciples didn't expect Jesus' resurrection, even though Jesus made it very clear to them, and we already covered this, that a resurrection was coming. If they really believed in the resurrection, folks, they would have made sure that his burial site, where that tomb was, would not been left unattended for 1 minute, at least for 3 days and 3 nights. Listen, if you had a family member or a very close friend, someone that you could actually call your disciple, and you over and over told that disciple, close friend, or relative, I'm dying, but you watch. In 3 days and 3 nights, I'm out of this place. You'll bury me, but I'll be out of that location. If for some reason, out of fear or whatever, you decided maybe it was too risky the first day and night, wouldn't you think by the 3rd day and 3rd night they would have lookouts to see if it was possible, even though it seemed improbable, after 3 days and 3 nights, even though they saw Lazarus come back from the dead. Think about it. How blinded they were to the truth. even after spending all that time with Jesus before his death, they were still blinded to the truth. To have at least a vigil going, if at least one person, they had enough people, not just the inner circle themselves, but on the outer circle, enough people would take every half hour a shift to make sure that what Jesus taught and preached would happen or wouldn't have happened. Either case. Now, the Jews want to be sure of that. You can guarantee that. As I mentioned before, during Jesus' time, there was an extraordinary interest in Jewish martyrs, Jewish religious figures, Jewish holy men, and their grave sites were cared for and honored. This, and the reason why I'm mentioning it in this teaching is because it suggests that the grave, because some people say that, oh, well, they didn't know where the grave was, or the reason why it was an empty tomb because they went to the wrong grave. No such luck. It doesn't add up because, like I said, martyrs, holy men, religious figures were considered to be honored, and wherever they would place them, whether you agree with them or not. And Jesus had a few people agree with him, would have made sure, because it was their custom, to, at least at the beginning stages, near to his death, to make sure that site was protected, was cared for. And especially after the Sabbath, they would have been there. Now, I believe one of the reasons why you don't see any disciples there, because everybody was running scared. I'll get to that in a minute. But the Jews, they wanted to be sure that no one messed with this grave. Not because they honored Jesus, because they actually listened to what he had to say. They didn't believe it, but they listened. And that grave, as I said, would not be lost so soon after Jesus was buried in that tomb. It would have been known to Jews and Christians, even though they were not called Christians back then, alike. And let me tell you, there'd be no resurrection faith. There'd be no faith in Jesus Christ. There would be no Christianity today if a resurrection didn't take place, because the resurrection faith would not have survived. There's no way it could have survived in the face of an empty tomb. A tomb that didn't contain any corpse whatsoever. The apostles wouldn't have preached, and most of them died, save one. Maybe that last one did too, but save one. They wouldn't have preached a resurrection message. There's no way. Let's look at his burial a little more in depth. Go to John 19. Those were my opening comments. Now let's go to John 19. Verse 39. We already been here before, but I want you to read something. And we're going to go a little bit slower this time. And there came also Nicodemus, which at the first came to Jesus by night, and brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pound weight. Then they took the body of Jesus and wound it in linen cloths with the spices, as the manner of the Jews is to bury. Now, granted, most Christians will not look up how in Jesus' time Jews were buried. And why would you? How does that pertain to the story? You already believe, supposedly, that Christ came out of the tomb, and you're trusting and faithing in Jesus. So you really don't need this part of the story. But I don't think it's by accident that this is put into the story. Think about it. Why we would need to know about a mixture of myrrh and alloys about 100-pound weight. Some people think it's only 75 pounds. No matter what, that's a lot of myrrh and alloys and anything else in that mixture. It's a lot of it. Normally, you wouldn't even use that much. Why so much? And they still didn't think it was sufficient because they came back. We'll get to that part. And wanted to add it to, if they possibly could, the mixture and applying it, the ointments, the myrrh, the alloys, after the 3 days and 3 nights came and went. Now, why is this significant? First of all, let's not forget, this was not just an ordinary Jewish burial that took place. Jesus didn't have just a pierced heart and lung and possibly broken rib. Jesus, I showed you that picture last time, was beaten brutally by the scourging, by the whipping, thorns on his head as he wore that crown of thorns. Up and down his body, you see all the marks in that linen cloth of someone that was beaten savagely. Most would have died. Hands pierced. Feet, or at least the ankles, were pierced. Then the spear. This was a body that brutally beaten and tortured and crucified from head to toe. 10 pounds of myrrh and alloys would not have been sufficient to keep the body from stinking the way it would have stunk in a more rapid fashion. They came with everything in the kitchen sink that they had to cover this dying man from head to toe with this mixture before they even wrapped him up. Now, they did it probably very quickly because they're fighting time. They had to get it done before the Sabbath started. That was a Jewish tradition and it was going to be kept. So they had to get that done quickly. And whatever they did, it didn't seem that was sufficient enough that they would come back after 3 days and 3 nights, supposedly, if you read the story, which I believe to be true, to even add more of that mixture. To protect and to preserve in a dignified way a decaying body as much as they could. Now, you read in John 39, and there came also Nicodemus, which at the first came to Jesus by night, and brought a mixture of myrrh and alloys. Now, I want you to put some understanding behind what really was happening here. Because this is going to get to a point which you'll ask yourself, How did Jesus, somehow resuscitated, was able enough to heal fast enough, if that was even possible, and escape from the wrapping, which would not be easily done, by the way? What do you mean? Just unwrap it? Not so fast. That's not how it works, my friend. And that's why I think we have, in fact, I know we have, the account of the details of what really took place at Jesus' burial. This was myrrh. Myrrh was a spice that adhered to the body. It was thick. It was sticky, very sticky, a gum type of resin type sticky. It was like the consistency of honey. And they just didn't spread it a little bit here, a little bit there. They had enough of this mixture to really cover Jesus' body thick with this substance. It was like the super glue of burial practices. When you would lay it on his body and then put the wrapping on top of that. That wrapping would stick to that glue and the glue would stick to the body. I don't think it was by accident too, even though it was common to use myrrh as one of the mixture ingredients. I mean, you've got to remember when the wise men brought their gifts to the baby Jesus. He probably was around 2 years old at the time. They brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Now, gold, to make a long story short, was to honor a king. Frankincense was used when you would anoint a king and worship the king, but mostly anointing the king. And myrrh, when you would bury a king. You're burying a king. And even from his birth to his death, that had significance. He was to be honored as a king. He was to be the anointed king. And he would die and be buried. And covered in myrrh and alloy. That was part of the mixture. Now, this myrrh, like I said, would adhere to the body. If you would remove the grave clothes, you would have to remove it with patience, and it had to be removed with you going through some great difficulty from separating the linen cloth, if you want to preserve that linen cloth, or if you don't, you could use another linen cloth, and that gummy type, resin glue type, the super glue of their time, of burial practices. Well, how do you know that? Well, you don't have to go very far even in the Bible to understand that. Just read the story of Lazarus. Go to John chapter 11. Things are not in the scriptures by accident. That's what I'm trying to say. John chapter 11, verse 44. And he that was dead came forth. Who? Lazarus. Bound hand and foot with grave clothes. Lazarus came back to life. And he was still bound. How? With grave clothes. And his face was bound about him with a napkin. What did Jesus say to the individuals that are looking at this taking place? Looking upon this taking place. He said, loose him and let him go. Listen, if I was dead and I came back to life, the first thing I would be doing is definitely taking that, whatever was bounding my face off. And here it says a napkin. It was a small little piece of cloth. By the way, they used also when Jesus was buried. Think about it. He came forth not already unwrapped after he was rose from the dead, but he was bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound about with a napkin. So basically what Jesus was saying, take off the grave clothes and let him go. What I want you to note here is that Lazarus' grave clothes had to be removed from his body because it would have been difficult for him to do it by himself. You were wrapped tightly, not like a mummy, but you were wrapped tightly, and that tight fitting would be because of what was holding all this together, that myrrh mixture. That myrrh mixture. So if Jesus somehow revived himself with the miraculous type of reviving that took place, if you really think about it, the way he was beaten, the way he was tortured, the way he was crucified, the way they verified that he was dead, and not his disciples. The Roman soldiers verifying they was dead. And it was important because we already covered this, because they had to be responsible for his death, to make sure that he did die before anyone would took him away. Now, let's add to the story. Matthew, go back to Matthew again. Go to verse 27. The little things in the scriptures that we could read right by, but they're there for a meaning, to fill in more details about what took place 2,000 years ago. Matthew 27, verse 59 through 60. And when Joseph had taken the body, he wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, and he laid it in his own new tomb, which he had hewn out in the rock, and he rolled a great stone to the door of the sepulchre and departed. Now, some have speculated based on what they've seen that was still available as evidence that goes back, by the way, almost to the beginning of when this happened in recorded history. And they speculate how much this stone might have weighed. And the average is about a ton, about 2,000 pounds. Yes, more than likely it was circular in its structure, so it would be easier moved than just picking up a 2,000-pound rock or stone. But nevertheless, it was very heavy. And according to speculation by what was available to be seen, even as far back as Jesus' day, it required several people, several men, not just people, men-like strength to move that stone. This is why when Mary Magdalene and other Mary and others went to Jesus' tomb after the Sabbath, they were concerned. They were preoccupied with this dilemma. Who would roll the stone away from the tomb so they could have entrance once they got there? Why? Because they wanted to continue to anoint Jesus' body with the mixture. They sure couldn't have done it by themselves. It was too big, it was too heavy. You go to Mark. Hopefully you're ready to go through the scriptures, because I want you to know the scriptures that go with the story. It's important, especially when you share with others. You go to Mark chapter 16. Usually have these marked, but tonight I don't. So we'll go a little slower. 16, verse 1. And when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James the Salome, had bought sweet spices that they might come and anoint him. And very early in the morning, the first day of the week, they came unto the sepulchre at the rising of the sun. And they said among themselves, who shall roll away the stone from the door of the sepulchre? They were preoccupied with this dilemma. They obviously didn't feel that they had enough strength to do it. So who's going to do it? And furthermore, who's going to convince the guards? If they knew about the guards, and that's a big what if, that they needed access to anoint Jesus' body. Not to mention, once they got there and they saw the guards, and if they were sleeping like some have claimed, the rolling of this approximate 2,000-pound stone would have made some noise. You would have heard it. It was not something that, even if you were dead in your sleep, that you would not wake up and notice. Now, in Matthew 27, as we follow the story, starting now in verse 65, yeah, 65, Matthew 27, 65. Now we come to the point where Pilate says unto them, Ye have a watch, go your way, make it sure as ye can. So they went and made the sepulchre sure, sealing the stone and setting a watch. Sealing the stone and setting a watch. The seal would be affixed on the stone somehow by the Romans. And it was placed there as a for prevention purposes, so no one would steal Jesus' body. Now, if you would have attempted to move that stone, that seal would have been broken. And if you were the one that broke that seal, you would face the death penalty under Roman law. Who in their right mind would dare this? Surely not as coward at the time disciples, ones that were running in fear and hiding in fear. You think they would pay that hefty penalty when they all, save maybe one, deserted him, when they took him in front of Pilate in the first place, and before Pilate, the religious leaders, the Jewish religious leaders? The disciples didn't show up any courage up to this point. What would make them have all of a sudden, at least maybe some of them, or even Peter, to muster up all this courage now to go against Roman law, risking the death penalty, to go steal Jesus' body or remove Jesus' body from the tomb so they could preach a resurrected body, resurrected Jesus, even though he wasn't resurrected? Who would risk that? Now, in Matthew 27, you see the whole story. Actually, I should have started with verse 62. They give you a better outline of what happened. Let's just do it now. The next day that followed, the day of the preparation, the chief priests and Pharisees came together unto Pilate. Once again, the religious leaders. Why? Because they heard what Jesus said. Saying, Sir, we remembered that the deceiver said, they're referring to Jesus, while he was yet alive. So they were convinced, by the way, another clue, that he was dead before they took him down from the cross. The Pharisees would have made sure of that also. While he was yet alive, after 3 days, I will rise again. So even being dead, after 3 days, I will arise again. Command, therefore, that the sepulchre be made sure until the 3rd day. In other words, guard it, lest his disciples come by night and steal him away, and say to the people, He is risen from the dead, so the last error shall be worse than the first. They knew. They didn't believe Jesus would come out of the grave with resurrection power. They were fearful that the disciples, to keep perpetuating the lie of the deceiver in their mindset, would steal the body. and keep preaching a message about Jesus. But now, not one just that walked the earth 3 years and a half preaching the good news that was about to happen and was going to take place, his death, resurrection, and eventually his ascension, that gave us peace and grace and mercy and removed our sin. No, they couldn't have that happen. So they didn't want that to happen. So they said, Pilate, those disciples are tricky, cunning characters, which I don't even know where they would get that from, because we don't see that anywhere in the scriptures, even when Jesus was being tried first by the religious leaders and then by the Romans. Where's the disciples? Nowhere to be found, except maybe Peter in the distance. Think about it. But just in case they want to perpetuate the story and the lie, we better protect this tomb so no one steals from it, stealing Jesus' body. So what did Pilate do? He said, basically, okay, take a guard. Not just one guard, by the way. A guard meant something else in the Roman military structure. And go make that tomb secure. And they went, they made the tomb secure, put a guard there, and also put a seal on it, seal on the stone, to make sure the body remained in that tomb. And let me tell you right now, I personally believe that before they put that seal on the stone, they made sure that Jesus was in there before they put that seal on the stone and start guarding it, because it would have been foolish not to. So the Jewish leaders sought out Pilate to request the tomb to be protected, where Jesus was buried, and a Roman guard to be stationed around it. You read that in the story. Now, some believe a Roman guard consists of anywhere from 10 people to 30 people. Now, if that's true, it's hard to imagine that any one time 10 people will be dead asleep, where the disciples could come in, or anyone else, and steal the body of Jesus, removing that 2,000-pound stone, that which would make noise, not to mention the sneaking around. I'm sure that many people that was required to remove that stone, at least several men, could have been all that quiet, including keeping the stone from making any noise as it was being moved. And if it was up to 30, the probability of that is even more ridiculous. But let's be realistic, because a Roman guard, in my research, even though some people like to say it's anywhere from 10 to 30, but most of the time when you see a Roman guard guarding a post or whatever, they're in their guarding duties, let's just call it that. It consists, I'll put the minimum on it, which recorded history has verified this to be true, and that is 4 people. 4 people. So at the minimum, there was 4 Roman individuals guarding that post. 4. And more than likely, there was a centurion that was assigned to it that took the duty of guarding this post, this tomb, very seriously. It was his reputation. This was not a low-key trial case that just took place. The Pharisees were not making it low-key. That's why they went to Pilate to request a Roman guard be posted at the tomb site. They took their job very seriously. They performed their duty to guard the tomb after the crucifixion very seriously, folks. Now, if you really think about it, once you place a Roman seal on something, this just happens to be on a stone that sealed the tomb shut. But once again, you have to go into the history, and I'm not going to go into it tonight because I don't have time. You can look into the history of Roman sealing on your own. When a Roman seal was fixed on anything, and in this case it has to be the tomb, Joseph's tomb, it meant something. It meant the honor and the respectability and the dignity of the Roman seal had to be protected. And if you were a soldier, you would protect that ancient practice with your life, if necessary. So to believe that somehow you had a bunch of lazy, sleeping, slumbering Roman soldiers all falling asleep at once and staying asleep through whatever happened when Jesus left that tomb is impossible to believe that it could have happened. And once again, a lot of people like to come up with all these reasonings without doing the research or the studies about how all this was taken so seriously in those days. It's like the soldier that are at the unknown. Oh, put it this way. It's like you've seen it not too long ago when Reagan passed away. There was a continuing watch over his body in the coffin at the locations, no matter where the location was, of a military personnel that were guarding and posted at his coffin location. You imagine if there were 4 of those surrounding the coffin, maybe up to 30, and they all fell asleep together, and all of a sudden they allowed visitors to come in and they're all walking around the coffin, but yet the soldiers are still asleep. Nothing could arouse them. They were so darn tired that nothing could have woken them up. Now I'm being silly in a way to make the point. Those soldiers that guarded and were at their post during Reagan's internment period or prior to his internment period took their job seriously. The Romans did the same thing, is what I'm trying to say. Whether out of honor, whether because of their training, whether out of the Roman military institutional belief systems or the governmental belief systems that you were so fully engaged in with your life, whatever the reasons, you just would not have fallen asleep, especially when you could take turns. Think about it. If there was 4, they could have took turns sleeping. If there was more than 4, well, you get the point. I don't want to try to get too ridiculous with this, but there's no way that even these Roman soldiers, which others have tried to put out there as a possible theory, that the Roman soldiers basically were hoodwinked by the disciples to allow them to take the body of Jesus. They would not jeopardize, friends, their Roman necks. No way. By sleeping on their post or by being bribed or somehow sympathizing the disciples' cause. Maybe one by themselves. I guess that's always a possibility. But all four or more? No way. These Roman soldiers, when they got to Jesus' tomb, when they arrived at Jesus' tomb, they sealed it. So how can you explain an empty tomb with soldiers guarding it? Now, some believe that maybe the guards were Jewish, and they were not Romans, but they were somehow Jewish temple guards. If that's true, and we already read it, why would the religious leaders, the Jewish religious leaders, go see Pilate and ask Pilate for Roman guards to guard the tomb? So that doesn't make any sense. Also, only a Roman delegate could seal a tomb under Roman authority, period. Now, they say, well, you have Matthew 28 that kind of throws a kink into the story. In Matthew 28, verse 11 reads, "Now when they were going, behold, some of the watch came into the city and showed unto the chief priests all things that were done. What happened is the guards, the Roman guards, went directly to the chief priests, the Jewish chief priests, and not to Pilate. And of course, you have to read all the verses, not just that verse. And start with verse 11, then you go to verse 12. And when they were assembled with the elders and had taken counsel, they gave large money unto the soldiers. These Jewish priests did, saying, Say ye, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we slept. And if this come to the governor's ears, we will persuade him and secure you. We'll protect you and we'll persuade him. So they took the money and did as they were taught. And this saying is commonly reported among the Jews until this day." So if they were Jewish temple guards, why would the temple guards be in trouble by Pilate? Pilate was just a Roman governor. So this had to have been Roman soldiers. If there were Jewish temple guards and not Roman guards, Pilate wouldn't care what happened at Jesus' tomb. Especially if people that were not really directly under his authority. Now the chief priests, however, assured protection to the guards if they would spread a lie. And you think about it. Imagine these guards waking up, seeing the seal broken and the stone moved out of the way, going inside the tomb and there's no body. You think think about it. You think they would have been that eager to run back to Pilate to tell him what happened? Think about it. They knew that their lives were on the line, my friends. So their second best option, probably knowing what the Jewish leaders was in fear of, Jesus' body going missing, decided to go to the Jewish leaders to see what they would have to say and concoct a story. And in this case, they probably would not even expect it. Get some money for the lie. Get some money for the lie that they were going to be spreading if asked what happened to Jesus' body. Think about it. Go back to Pilate, death sentence. Not a very good option. Especially you knew that, wait a minute, you're definitely not sure what happened. And you can't put the pieces together. Pilate sure will never believe your story. Maybe you could con the Jewish leaders to come up with a different story, one that would protect their rear ends against a resurrected Jesus story that would give fresh new blood and energy to the people that did believe, and possibly people that didn't believe, that Jesus truly was the Son of God. Now, even if you were a a Jewish temple guard, the consequences of sleeping on the job were not that much easier. It was not that much more pleasant. You go to the Mishnah and you see some examples of what would happen to a temple guardsman if they were found sleeping. A Jewish leader would have a stick in his hand, and he would have other temple guards around him and other leaders, and if for some reason, for instance, you fell asleep, and there's accounts of this, he would be beaten by the staff, and then his raiment would be burned, whatever he was wearing, meaning that he would go naked. And there were some accounts that were very detailed in describing these events in the Mishnah, when someone was caught sleeping at their post. They were beaten by a stick and then stripped of their clothing and burned. Their clothing was burned, and they would stand there and walk naked in shame. And if you look at Revelation 16, you see a possibly insight into the language that was used at that time that kind of correlates what I just told you. Behold, come I as a thief in verse 15. Blessed is he that watcheth and keep his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame or deformity in the literal. So there was this concept. If you were stripped of your clothing, you'd be walking in shame for whatever the reason why you received this punishment. And if you were a Roman guard that fell asleep, this is the outcome and the consequences that you would pay. Now, there was, I have it here somewhere. Well, I just tell you about it. There was this one example of a Roman soldier, for instance. Now back to a Roman soldier. Now, if they basically fell asleep on the job, it was a death penalty. There was one Roman soldier that we know throughout history. The story's been told many times, especially those of you who study Roman history, approximately around 200 BC, that a Roman soldier, this particular Roman soldier fell asleep. So the tribune decided they were going to basically punish this Roman soldier. So they took a stick in their hand and they would gently touch the Roman soldier, or in this case, they would consider him as a criminal by this point. Immediately after touching him by the touching of the stick, all the soldiers that were gathered around to see this, all the soldiers of that particular legion then attacked him with sticks and stones, which meant eventually he was beaten to death and destroyed amongst those soldiers that were in that camp. I mean, there's a lot of illustrations, a lot of history behind what was to be expected. If you fell asleep on the job, you were punished, and most of the time it was a punishment by death. By death. You think if there only were 4 soldiers, Roman soldiers, they would risk that outcome for some Z's? I doubt it. It just doesn't add up. So probably what happened, each soldier took a turn of catching maybe some Z's or relaxing or resting, whatever, but not all 4, or maybe even more than 4, possibly up to 30 of them. All the precautions would be taken, my friend, for that never to happen. So Jesus' tomb would not be found empty if the Jewish leader's story about maybe the disciples trying to steal his body were actually true. Now, could have disciples have stolen Jesus' body? The question then is, where the heck did they find the courage to do so? Like I said, they all fled when Jesus was arrested. Every single one of them, as far as we know. Why? Because they feared to be arrested. They didn't want to be tortured for just being a disciple of Jesus Christ. How do you know that? Go back to Matthew. Might as well give you the scripture, so if somebody ever asks you, you'll have it handy. These were cowards at this point. They eventually became true heroes of faith, trusting and believing in Jesus no matter what. But these were cowards at this point. You go to Matthew 26, verse 56. But all this was done after Jesus was arrested. But all this was done that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled. Then all the disciples forsook him. They forsook him and then fled. Mark 14. Give you one more reference. Verse 50. And they all forsook him and fled once again. What about Peter? He seemed to have the most courage of the bunch. He went as far as the courtyard to see the outcome of the trial, to see the outcome of why Jesus was arrested. But he was no courageous individual. Maybe at that point a curious individual, as long as it didn't cost him anything, but he was far from being courageous. When he was recognized by one of the individuals that was near him, he denied Jesus not once, not twice, but 3 times as was prophesied by Jesus, and he ran and he wept bitterly. Because why? Because he forsook and also ran in fear. You can find that, I don't have time to go to it, in Matthew 26, verses 69 through 75. Matthew 26, verses 69 through 75. You find the story about Jesus, about Peter, probably the most courageous one in the bunch, now also forsaken and running for his life. And he denied them all before him. He denied Jesus before them all. All the people that could hear his denial. I don't know what you're talking about. Who's Jesus? In a sense, that's what Peter's response was. And then he went out of the gateway of the area, and someone else saw him, another girl. And what happened? He denied Jesus once again. You can read the story for yourself. Now, you could say, well, that's before Jesus' death. What about after his death? While he was in the tomb, weren't the disciples more courageous and bolder after he died than before he died? Well, if they were, it was not too much later, and it wasn't directly after the crucifixion and burial of Jesus Christ. They weren't. Even after Jesus was resurrected, they still locked themselves behind closed doors. Why? Because they were in fear of the Jews. Go to John 20. 20th chapter, verse 19. That reads, "Then the same day at evening, being the first day of the week, when the doors were shut, where the disciples were assembled for fear of the Jews, came Jesus, a resurrected Jesus, and stood in the midst and said unto them, Peace be unto you." Well, there you go, my friends. They were behind shut doors, assembled together in fear of the Jews. You think, after Jesus resurrected, they were more courageous or just the same, still running and fleeing and hiding? They were still running and fleeing and hiding, my friends. This group of people would never even dare risk breaking that seal, by the way, of that stone to remove it to steal Jesus' body. They just wouldn't. Where were these individuals when Jesus was being trialed? Nowhere to be found. Maybe John, in fact, we know John was at the crucifixion. But then we all know that they were hiding and fleeing from the Jews, locked behind closed doors, hoping that no one will find out where they were located. There's no way that these disciples have found the courage to face Roman soldiers, trained Roman soldiers, trained to kill. No way they would have the courage to break the seal. I think there'd been too much trembling going on to probably even move the stone. And then if they did, once they got in there, they had to unwrap Jesus, and that didn't take a minute or two to accomplish. Remember what he was wrapped in. That's why I told you, don't just read past the myrrh and the aloe. Jesus was wrapped and underneath that wrap was a sticky goo substance that the wrap would have stuck to, making it impossible for him just walk out to start with, even if he would be revived, and then making it impossible unless they carry the body of Jesus out of the tomb without even wrapping him up. But that's not possible because we know the wrappings were left in the tomb after Jesus was resurrected, including the face napkin. The consequence of being caught doing all this were too heavy. Much more heavier the consequences would be than just standing by Jesus' side when he was arrested. Think about it. Was Jesus removed? If he was, then by whom? Was it his enemies? Was it his friends? If it was his friends, how did they get past the guards? And if it was his enemies, why would they even remove the body from the tomb? It would just validate what Jesus said to his followers, that he would raise from the dead. It would have made the stories way too easy to believe that Jesus' body was no longer in the tomb because he rose from the dead. So the wisest decision to them, the Jewish leaders, was just to guard the tomb. Pilate went along with it. And if anybody was going to make a claim that he rose from the dead, you can say, not true. Let me break the seal, roll the tomb with enough winds and say, here's his body. You're lying. You're just perpetuating the deceiver's story that he preached about himself that would happen, that couldn't have happened, because here lies his body. And it was sure his friends that would, his disciples, his followers, that removed the body. I don't think they had the power or the courage to do so. They fled, they ran, they forsook, as soon as they saw him taken into custody. Peter trembled at a voice of a servant girl that identified him as being one of Jesus' followers. These men would not have risked their lives at that point in their life. There is no way. They would never muster the courage to overcome soldiers of the Roman army, even if they could, which I doubt they could have. They were living in a mindset, how could have Jesus died? They didn't listen to what he said as closely as the Jewish leaders obviously listened to him about his death and resurrection. They didn't have that in their mindset. If anything, they're probably going amongst each other, questioning their belief systems at that time. Why did they put so much trust in the man that eventually would die? And the way he died. After all, he was supposed to be our Messiah. Why would they risk their lives for an imposter? You don't think that circulated in their mindset? Do you possibly think that maybe they thought that they were defrauded? And now they're just laying low. Hopefully enough time goes by and they could slip out of town. And furthermore, how come none of Jesus' disciples were ever arrested for stealing the body? You can't find a record of that anywhere. Because they didn't. All the Roman guards had to do is testify that they stole the body. Of course, they had to explain why they were overtaken by these peasant Gentiles, not Gentiles, but peasant Jews in their mindset that could not have possibly overtaken them because they were not trained in military ways of the Roman army. None of them were arrested. And none of them even were interrogated by any account in history. There's no record of that in the scriptures or outside of the scriptures. What the chief priest did was met with the elders, and they devised a plan. They gave the soldiers a large sum of money and told them what to say. His disciples came during the night and stole them away while they were asleep. I don't even think Pilate knew what was going on. It was a hush money to keep the Roman guards silent. And just in case anyone does ask, the disciples stole the body. Period. The disciples never understood what Jesus was preaching and teaching and predicting about his own resurrection. When you look at the scriptures, even Mary Magdalene comes back and announces to the disciples that Jesus is not in the tomb. He must have risen from the dead, because she was told that by an angel. They still didn't even believe her. They were still hiding and scared of the Jews. If they were to go around announcing that Jesus was alive and he is truly the risen Savior, you don't think that would have caused them tremendous hardships in Jerusalem? It eventually probably would have cost their own lives in the very near future. Now, they became courageous men. They became a living testimony of the power of Jesus in their life. And all save one died horrible deaths, a martyr's death. Now, would they died for a lie? Would they have died if they thought someone defrauded them? What did they have to gain from it? It sure wasn't anything monetarily. There's no record of that either. It's just too much evidence, in my opinion. You might call it circumstantial evidence, but it's still evidence. You really got to think outside of the box. In fact, Jesus is not the lunatic. When you put all the evidence together, the ones outside of the box, fabricating all these possibilities, are the real lunatics, not Jesus. The grave clothes that were left behind were a testimony that no theft occurred. Why would thieves, if you think about it, go through all the trouble of taking the linen clothes off of Jesus' body with all that honey goo-like substance, which would have took a long time to do, by the way, which gave them more opportunity to be caught if they were going to be caught? Why would they go through all that and take that kind of risks? John 20. I'm almost done. John 20, verse 3. Peter therefore went forth, and the other disciple, and came to the sepulchre. So they ran both together. The other disciple did outrun Peter, and came first to the sepulchre. And he, stooping down, looking in, saw the linen clothes lying, yet went he not in. Then cometh Simon Peter following, and went into the sepulchre, and seeth the linen clothes lie, and the napkin that was about his head not lying with his linen clothes, but wrapped together in a place by itself. Why would the disciples, if they stole the body, go through all that trouble of unwrapping Jesus and leaving those clothes behind? Now, if they wanted to perpetuate the story that he rose from the dead and he came out of his clothing, that's one thing. But they never really perpetuated that kind of story. They perpetuated a risen Christ resurrection as Jesus prophesied, which came to pass. They kind of left, except for the record here, what happened to that linen clothing. That linen clothing is a testimony that no theft occurred, my friend. Thieves would not go through all that trouble and then leave it behind, risking the time it would take to unravel the linen cloth from all the gooey substance and leave it all behind. I believe the radiating power of the resurrection melted most of that gooey substance, if not all of it, or just maybe left some trace of it. Too bad they can't be examined a little closer to see exactly the potential amount that possibly is used in the burial. That would just solidify the story, but that's neither here or there. And as far as Jesus going to the wrong tomb, as far as the disciples going to the wrong tomb, that's nonsense. The women who were following Jesus and then outside his tomb, waiting as the other disciples were preparing Jesus' body, they knew exactly where he was buried. You find that story in Luke 23, verses 55 through 56. Let's just go there as I conclude this for this evening. Luke 23, verse 55 through 56 reads, "And the woman also which came with him from Galilee followed after and beheld the sepulchre." They beheld the sepulchre. They knew where the tomb is. How could so many people misplace the tomb? Not just one, not just two, but the woman also. And how his body was laid. And they returned to prepare spices and ointments and rested the Sabbath day according to the commandment. You go to Matthew 27. It also says that Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were sitting there opposite the tomb. They knew where the tomb was. They didn't go to the wrong tomb, my friend. Plus, if you really put common sense to the whole matter, it's kind of hard not to find a tomb that were guarded by the Roman guards. How many tombs do you think were being guarded by the Roman guards at that particular time? I bet you not a single one. Not a single one. So how can you miscalculate that? There's just too many what ifs when you add it all together. Everything just compounds. And remember the probability of statistics that I use so often? You start adding this all together up. The probability of it all being a lie, it's not feasible. The probability of being the truth, you will realize, is nothing but the truth. Even mathematically, it doesn't add up when you try to disprove it. But to try to disprove it, like so many people try to do, they don't really give you all the details that goes with burying somebody in those days, and the practice, and the precision, and the care which someone would show someone else when they would pass on. And if you were a Jewish martyr or religious figure, that tomb or that burial site was marked. You couldn't have got lost. It was cared for. Now add on top of that the Roman guard attention on the matter and the Jewish priests. You don't think Those Jewish priests, or some of the Jewish priests, were designated to go to that tomb every day and check with the Roman soldiers. And that's probably how they gained a more confident relationship with them in perpetuating this stupid story about the disciples stealing the body. I bet you representatives of those Jewish leaders, if not the Jewish leaders themselves, were constantly at the tomb checking in with those Roman guards, making sure everything was in its proper order. You don't think those Jewish leaders would probably quiz those guards saying, has anybody come here? Have you seen his disciples or followers? Think about it. The truth of the matter, everyone was running scared, and they were locked behind closed doors. Well, a great earthquake came. It shook so hard it rolled that stone out of the way. Jesus came out of that tomb. The Roman guards didn't see it, but nevertheless, it happened. And if you could believe that resurrected Jesus came out of that tomb, then you're not having any problem of him going right by those Roman guards without them taking notice. Remember, earlier in the gospel records, how Jesus would slip out when the mob was going for him to get their hands on him with the intentions to kill him. Somehow, magically, he just disappeared. And that's why he was still alive in a flesh and blood body. Imagine what Jesus can do in a flesh and whatever body he has, a resurrected body. My friends, he came out of that tomb. I'm a little frustrated because I don't want to end now, but I have to end here. We've gone over the hour. I want to hear from you. I'll pick this up. But as that list, item number 10 on the list, did someone remove the body? No. Jesus removed himself. That's all it took. The resurrected power that God gave him through his body that raised him from the dead with a new body. In the process, it shook the heck out of the area and rolled that stone away, and Jesus came out of that tomb with a promise. No matter what our grave site might be, it can hold this body down. Neither. That's the promise. And one day we'll get new resurrected bodies. But until then, let's just keep on fighting the good fight of faith. Now, that's just another chapter in this series. Did someone remove the body? No. Jesus removed himself with the resurrecting power that's described in Ephesians chapter 1. You can read it for yourself. He came out of that tomb. He is alive and he is well. Play the song.